Okay. All right. So I guess without further ado, I'll get started. Um, Welcome to our most recent assistant dean's workshop. This one's called Making Accommodations. And I'm going to start, we're a relatively small group, so I'm going to start with some introductions, and I'm also going to share my screen here so that you could see the inevitable PowerPoint slides that I've used. Let's see. Oh, so many things in my way. Hold on. Okay. Um, so as you can see, making accommodations. Um, and a real quick introduction. I've been interested in this subject for a long time. We have a lot of students, and I felt like a really rapidly increasing number of students who were seeking either formal or informal accommodations. And I could tell, I think we chose these topics maybe in August, July or August, something like that. And I could tell that that must be the sort of general vibe going around campus because in the time between when I chose this subject to present and today, so many folks across campus have come out with revisions to the accommodation procedures, presentations of their own. And so I felt like I really was able to take advantage of the research and presentations of several others. And in fact, I feel like today is sort of a distillation of a lot of different things that are going on across campus that I'm happy to share and we can sort of work through. I thought I'd start with maybe um, introductions and welcome, of course, right? So, I thought we could do this in small chat rooms, but it's not necessary since there's not a huge number of us. So what I'd like to do is just sort of go through the Zoom room, ask you, in addition to your name and department, to please describe what brought you here today. I mean, briefly, of course, and offer an example of a challenge, a question, or a suggestion you might have just at the get-go. For with regard to accommodations. So I'm going to just sort of go through the folks that I see in the order that I see you. Um, so how about I'll start with LJ, Liliana?
Yeah, of course. So I am Ljiljana Đurašković or Liliana Duraskovic. I'm from Slavic department. I'm teaching Bosnian, Croatian, Montenegrin, Serbian there, and Russian. Also work as a director of undergraduate studies, and I'm also an assistant dean. What brings me to our workshops? I'm really very interested to learn more from our workshops, and all the topics are amazing. So that's why I'm here.
Great, thanks. How about Jeff? I see you next.
Absolutely. I'm Jeff Aziz from the English department. I'm also an assistant dean, and I am here in part to show the flag. And actually, Frayda, at the moment, I'm navigating a situation in which I have a student who has legitimate accommodations, and I have a faculty member who has become extremely frustrated with that student to the point where, they may be departing from best practices. And so, one of the things that I'm thinking about here is not just what these things are in their absolute sense, but how they work in practice in the relationship between the student and the instructor, like G grades, right? There's policy, and then there is the very complex question of how does that play out in practice?
Yeah, terrific. I think that was certainly part of what inspired me to think through this. How about Erica?
Hi, everyone. I'm Erica. I'm from the Department of Biological Sciences. And I think for me, accommodations become a challenge because I teach very large lecture courses. And so in one semester, I can have upwards of 20 or 30 students that all have DRS accommodations, and they're often different. And so maintaining this sort of individualized education where every student is an individual and has their own needs while also being able to manage that large number is sort of where I face the most challenges.
Great, thank you. Bill?
Hi, I'm from the math department. I'm here for a reason I don't understand. I've received a Zoom link for a meeting, and
Oh,
my policy has always been never to attend meetings if I don't have an agenda first. So I clicked on it to see what it was. Okay, so that's why I'm here. I'll probably step out in a bit. In terms of accommodations, in mathematics, the standards are external, so my policy has always been to help students however they need help, wherever they're at, to meet the external standards that they have to meet in math classes. So, um, the main challenge has been for me, I get a bunch of tests late, and that means it takes an extra day to get them graded and return them to students. And of course, feedback is very important for learning, and quick feedback is more useful than late feedback. But that's the only issue I've run into. So I'll probably say nice to see you and good luck. It sounds interesting and important, but I have a line of students at my door right now who need help.
well, thanks for checking in, Bill.
Okay. Yeah.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Amani?
Hi. So my name is Amani Ataya. I'm from the Less Commonly Taught Languages Center, Department of Linguistics, and Director of Undergraduate Studies for the New Arabic major. I'm here today because I find those workshops really interesting, and I'm always doing something else at the time. And thankfully, I'm at home today and I got a reminder. So here I am. I don't have a lot of issues with accommodations, except maybe for the G grade. And yeah, a lot of students are requesting that now. And I would like to see some kind of regulations made so that we can control who gets a G grade and who doesn't.
Okay, thank you. Um, yeah, as you may have known, we had a previous one on workshop on G grade, so I don't think we'll have a big discussion of those today, but thank you. Is it Caro?
Yeah, I'm a faculty in the English department, and I'm here because I am interested in talking about potentially moments in which there are conflicts in accommodations. This is something that I think Amani, you were kind of suggesting. For me, I what I would be interested in talking about too is conflicts in the accommodations between instructor and student. So I'm neurodivergent, and there aren't a lot of venues in the university for kind of talking about that kind of conflict,
Mhm.
or really for supporting neurodivergent faculty. But it's something that I've talked about informally with our disability studies and accommodations coordinator within English, Jessie Mail. And for example, kind of allowing students to kind of regulate their level of stimulus in the classroom. I always sort of tell them, you can crochet, you can make memes, you can wear earplugs if you need to. But of course, that increases the level of sort of stimulus noise for me. So how do you negotiate those kinds of situations as an instructor? Um, I would also be interested in just kind of strategizing best practices for neurodivergent students. One of the things I've done in my classes is get rid of reading quizzes, for example, because when students need extra time and need a low distraction environment, am I going to force sort of ADHD students out of the classroom to do that when they might miss out on part of the discussion from needing the extra time?
Mhm.
So I've sort of just decided that reading quizzes like aren't accessible. So just performing these kinds of sort of small kinds of changes or introducing these kinds of small changes are sort of where I focused my attention. But there are still going to be those like bigger kind of conflicts that I'm negotiating between sort of like my access needs and students' access needs.
Okay, great. And that is really a big part of what I had in mind today is us workshopping this because, of course, not only is each course really different, but there's huge differences in the size of the classes that we teach, in the subject matter, of course, and in the demands that might come with the discipline itself. You know, somebody in biology or organic chemistry is going to be in a very different set of circumstances than somebody who teaches a relatively small seminar. And so I feel like, um, we can think through and workshop some of those ideas, which will be great. Okay, Leanne.
Hi, everyone. I'm Leanne Sukas. I'm in the history department, and I'm enjoying the workshop so much as well. I think that, to be super brief, I feel like the world of accommodations is a really shifting landscape, that we get sort of information out and blasts out about new faculty expectations and student options. And I think it just changes really quickly. And we as faculty and our students interpret it so differently that I'd love to see us, as others have said, meet somewhere in a shared understanding of the purpose and the spirit of these accommodations and how we can best serve the students.
Great, thanks. Thomas?
Hi, everybody. I'm Thomas Dine. I'm faculty in the Slavic department, like Liliana, where I am the major advisor. And the reason I'm here is tied into what I teach. On the one hand, I do a lot of literature courses where it could not possibly be easier to bring in accommodations for any students, right? I can simply just make reading quizzes. Sometimes, Kara, my solution to that in the past, not that getting rid of them is wrong at all, but my solution has been to just make the quizzes all Canvas based, and then students can take them over a week period in any environment they want to, and we still have time in class for it. But if you have to take it outside of class, they can do it whenever they want to. But in that case, like I can add extensions wherever, right? I let students just write me for whatever reason and do proactive extensions and ask if they need a mental health weekend, no problem. But when it comes to language classes, which is a skill and task based course, if they need accommodations with regard to extra absences, of course we could give it to them, but then they're missing that content by default, and they don't even they'll miss the opportunity to then build upon that practice in that course day. And of course, then students also have the right to privacy with regard to their need for accommodations. And in a skill-based language course like ours, we have in-class written exams on pen and paper every 5 weeks to combat ChatGPT effectively. So it's a very different environment, bringing in accommodations for language classes, in my experience, versus for literature or content or culture classes. And negotiating that difference is something I'd really be interested in brainstorming effectively.
Okay, thank you so much. Adriana?
Well, thank you, everybody. I used to teach a course called Music and Disability Studies, and so this became very evident to me, and echoing what Caro was bringing up. When we shut the lights off, when we put it on, and basically I was very in tune to the volume of the music we were listening to. And actually, I did a deep dive on this a long time ago. I can pull up some of that data as to how our equipment actually doesn't comply. It just really, I mean, there's just no sense of what actually happens in these classrooms. So that was a big thing. And then the second population that I keep thinking about always is not just the students that need accommodations, but also siblings of who are in family dynamics where certain cases are more prevalent. And so uh, it's just an unmarked population, let's put it that way. And just to share, I had a student who really had a brother that had many challenges, and so his primary role was to be the caretaker for this person, and brother would come into the class with us. So it was a very interesting perspective on family life, just to keep in mind.
Oh, great. Thank you. Xiaolun? Oh, I think you're muted. Xiaolun, I think you're muted.
Can you hear me now?
Perfect.
Oh, okay. So yeah, I'm I'm from physics, teaching big classes as large as like 200 students and small classes as small as maybe, 10, 20 students. And what I have observed over the years is that the number of students claim for disability just coming up, to a level which is kind of, I don't even know it's true or not. I mean, some of the classes like 10% of students, they claim disability, require special accommodation, like extended, time for homework, extended time for exams. And those things actually pre-arranged, they're okay. I think I can handle it. But the problem is when those exam comes up, then suddenly, you have, I'm not saying a large number, but you see every large classes when the exam comes up, and just a couple hours before the exam, you see those emails basically claim, "Oh, I'm sick," Uh, so so what am I supposed to do? I mean, in the syllabus, we basically says, if you are really not able to do it, you should give me some doctor's notes. But yeah, students go to the clinic, but those are very kind of brief, kind of doctor notes, just saying, okay, this student visited the clinic. Now, am I supposed to really take this note seriously and, just give the students a benefit? I mean, that's usually what I do. I give them benefit of doubt and then let them, reschedule those things. But I just worry those numbers are going to increase, and eventually I just don't know how to handle this kind of situation. You have to prepare multiple exams for those large classes. I just hope there's a more, clear rule as what, faculty should follow. But you can see those numbers increase. I go to clinic, I ask those people, I say, they recognize this is a trend. Just before those big exams, students basically claim sick and they don't want to do it. And from faculty's point of view, the only way I can do is, if you give them doctor notes, I should give you benefit of doubt. Just a few I can handle it, but I would say suppose you have 10 or 20 students, eventually they're all doing the same thing, it could be a problem.
Mhm. Okay, great. I'm sure that we'll come back to that set of issues.
Yeah.
I think a lot of people may feel that way. Excuse me, Sudi?
Good afternoon. It's a pleasure to be here for this very important conversation, of course. And I'm sorry that I missed the first part. Like Leanne said, I think this is a topic that changes, that's evolving, and accommodation is a very broad concept that I think should be approached with empathy and compassion and some cultural humility. Because no matter what we do in this area, perhaps we're able to provide some accommodation, sometimes not. So I think it's a topic that we have to create that conversation where we are, not just at the beginning of a term, where we are continuously creating space to learn about students' needs, because those needs also evolve, right? So I think that conversation should remain open for us to really ensure that we are providing access to equitable learning opportunities. No matter what people say that they need, sometimes there is always something we don't know. And I think also part of it for me, what's on my mind is really creating that space in the classroom for discovering deeper connections, the invisible aspect of our lives. I mean, what we see is maybe 5%. People bring to the table, maybe a small percentage, but I think what we don't see is what is essential most of the time. So I think this is really, I'm glad that it's also such a broad concept because students do bring diverse expectations to the classroom and diverse needs. So I think that's why I think it's a conversation that must be approached with cultural humility, but also remains open, right? So on my mind is that learning style, but also has been on my mind recently is digital accessibility also. Something that I'm also learning to, I don't know much about it yet, but I'm learning in terms of how to create slides and handouts that are accessible. Thank you, Frayda, for leading this important conversation today. Yeah.
Thank you so much. Hila.
Yes, hi everyone. I'm sorry for being late as well to the first part. I'm from the Jewish Studies department. And I also just really wanted to learn about the different needs and maybe possible accommodations that I maybe am unaware of that I should do, or just to learn some more about the different needs of students. Um, I think that my biggest issue, I'm not sure if that, if we're going to discuss that, but it's more about triggering issues in class. I give a lot of trigger alerts, but almost every year, maybe, I get this note on the teaching survey about another thing that might have been triggering for another student. So, yeah, this is my main concern, I think.
Okay, great. Thank you. I missed Laura Lovett before. Sorry about that, Laura. You were on a moving screen.
Hi, so I have a kind of slightly different question, but it's not unrelated to Karos. And it's that often as an instructor, I'm dependent on where students being able to see how I teach big lecture courses. I'm in the history class, not my medium lecture courses. I'm in the history department. But being able to sort of see where students are tracking students' discussion or eye contact. But more and more, I find students are constantly on their computers playing, many times playing games. I know this because I'm often doing observations of teaching instructors. And so actually one of the things I talk to my students about is I'm required to create a low stimulus environment for some of my students. And I make the parallel of if you're sitting on a plane and the person you're trying to sleep and the person in the seat in front of you is watching a movie, you're watching that movie, right? And so I find that discussion around kind of how to create a learning environment that's conducive to everyone, including so many of my students who require kind of low stimulus pieces, kind of changes the way. And I wonder if this is appropriate to discuss in terms of changes the dynamic. And so I've been getting a lot of kickback from students who are upset that I basically tell them they can't do Wordle or whatever they're doing while they're in class. And so we push to kind of have them take notes. I do old school blue book exams. The other thing, and this is newish for me, is often kind of as an administrator, I'm the director of gender, sexuality, and women's studies. Some of the things that I'm sometimes challenged with is how navigating, accommodating faculty's concerns with students. And this is relatively new to me because I've just become, hopefully temporarily, ideally a wheelchair and walker user. And so had an accident and spent the break in the hospital, but I'm now kind of thinking through issues like, there's an event tonight at Hillman that I should be at, but trying to figure out, is the walk sufficiently shoveled between Posvar and Hillman, for example. But also sort of thinking about kind of neurodivergent faculty and addressing kind of their needs in conjunction with also addressing student needs as an administrator.
Okay, great. Thank you. And last but certainly not least, Alana.
Hi, everyone. I'm Alana Carter Donaldson, and I'm a visiting lecturer in the Gender, Sexuality, and Women's Studies Department. And I kind of have two examples to share. So last semester, I had a student who had, I guess, she didn't disclose what, obviously her disabilities were, and obviously I wasn't expecting her to do that. But she also didn't want to get accommodations. And she reached out to me to kind of like tailor her assignments and stated to me that she had worked with previous instructors in GSWS before, and they did that for her. But this was an online class, so it was a little bit different. And then this semester, I actually have a student who has disclosed to me that she has reading comprehension trouble, and she is in a reading intensive course. And so I guess, while I just want to disclose that I have a little bit of a background in disability history in terms of education, and I am the sibling of a young adult and also the niece of an older man who both have intellectual disabilities. I'm not unfamiliar with some of these challenges, but I think it's a little bit different in a college setting. And I'm just really curious to hear suggestions or ideas on how to navigate these challenges in sort of a balanced way that not only assists the students, but also doesn't encumber kind of the learning objectives of these classes as well as the flow of assignments.
Okay, great. Well, I think these introductions have been super helpful to me, and it reaffirms my general sense that it's a broad set of issues, and the nature of all of our classes and the wide array of student accommodations requested and so forth can be a super huge challenge in the classroom. And of course, the primary goal is to keep true to our course objectives and pedagogy that we have in mind. So we've got a real set of things to sort of think through. And that's really the challenge that I had, right? I mean, at some level, accommodations are always asking you, it seems to me, to put a sort of quantifying, value on what's really a qualitative life experience, right? How much reading is too much reading? How many days missed is too many days missed? How much anxiety is normal? And how much anxiety warrants a much more substantive accommodation, right? And so, so many of these accommodations ask us to, again, put a number to absences, assignments, and that's really not how people live their lives. So I think the right from the get-go, it's really a big challenge on how we manage this. So to that end, I started to think, well, how can we begin to imagine this, right? There is a long series of best practices. And I decided to, rather than try and itemize all of these things, because I knew that would come out in your own classroom experience, I sort of took the bird's eye view and began to imagine from a big picture, from a meta level, how can we begin to address some of the issues that we've just talked about, right? And so I focused on three things. One is this notion of universal design, which is has really addressed has really been incorporated into so many aspects of contemporary life. If you've got a remodel on your kitchen, they're thinking about universal design. But of course, we want to think about universal design in the classroom and in particular in higher education. So I did include a source here for those of you who want a deeper dive. I'm just going to touch on some of the generalities of that, right? Most of us come into contact with accommodations through DRS, the Disability Resource Services here at Pitt. And they were very generous in sharing some of their data and their priorities. And so I'm going to work with that also. And then finally, I have some additional resources at Pitt that maybe you have thought of with regard to uh, access and inclusivity, but maybe not. And so I'll talk about that too. Needless to say, I'm welcome to questions, considerations, all of that as we move along, because as we could see from the introductions, again, people are dealing with a wide set of issues and very different classrooms sometimes as well. Okay. So, oh, by the way, let me ask before I move on, I want to make sure, did I miss anybody on the introductions? The screen was constantly shifting, so I want to make sure I didn't miss anybody. Okay, well, I'm not seeing any hands. Okay, so let me move forward here. So, in thinking about universal design and its sort of counterpart of web accessibility, and I know, several people raised issues sort of along the lines of uh, web and course design, Canvas and the like. But in short, universal design for learning is simply a teaching approach that works to accommodate the needs and abilities of all learners and eliminates unnecessary hurdles in the learning process. So that sounds simple enough, but of course, the work becomes what's necessary and what's unnecessary. And as Tom and others have noted, the difference between a lit class and a language class is where some of the work happens there. Web accessibility is beyond the capacity of us to talk about in great detail here. There is so much involved with web accessibility in terms of websites, tools, technologies that are designed and developed so that people with disabilities can use them, and specifically perceive, understand, navigate, and interact with the web and contribute to the web. And in anticipation of this workshop, I did the Center for Teaching and Learning's workshop on web accessibility. And it is, I mean, it's unbelievable the number of resources that are available, but it's also goes to great depths and involves a fair amount of technology. So I'm going to touch on some kind of highlights of that. But that can be another thing that you think about at least, right? Okay, so Canvas and web accessibility, these are some of the technologies that I'm talking about. They have rich content editor, accessibility checkers. There's a software package called You Do It, which works with Canvas to check files and links to make sure that they're live, that can help you modulate color contrast, headings and elements, provide alt text and table headers. So to help make your Canvas class as accessible as possible to as wide a range of folks as possible. And there is, especially for visually impaired students, JAWS and other forms of screen readers that can convert visual data to sound. And again, there are a lot of workshops and Canvas resources available to help you through that, but it is quite an investment on the part of the faculty to work these into Canvas. Okay, so that's one set of tools at least that's out there to help you. And in thinking about in the workshop and in thinking about these web technologies, Laura Tribus, who was the instructor for that class, did a terrific job of, I think, introducing sort of broad ideas about how accessibility and working with disability services can come into play, right? And one of the cases that she makes, which is probably something we're all somewhat sympathetic to, is that when we create digital or other environments that take disabilities into account, we create digital or other spaces that can benefit everyone. And that's really sort of the foundation of universal design. This notion that through flexibility and eliminating as many hurdles as possible, we're actually creating, just like the curb cuts below, a set of criteria that really have surprising benefits for a wide array of people, and including people who wouldn't otherwise need accommodations, right? And all of the people that I talked to, and of course, I think as faculty, we're probably all on board with this, thought about the ways in which pedagogy should be central to all assignments. And that includes those with accommodations. You don't want an assignment that isn't advancing your pedagogical goals in some key way, right? So before settling on any accommodation or any task in general, decide what those pedagogical goals are that are being pursued, and really sort of think through, is this task, is this reading, is it advancing those goals, or is it something that really I'm used to doing? Maybe I'm sort of guilty of that, right? It's like, oh, maybe I need a test, maybe I don't need a test. And if so, what's it really advancing in terms of student learning? Okay, and that's the key question for me in thinking about this before we think about, disability, accommodations, procedures, all of those other things. But basically, what do I want students to learn and how will I know that they've learned it? That becomes to me the sort of centerpiece of everything that we can bring to our classes. All right. And so some ways you might think about approaching this, again, from a sort of big picture view, is bringing in as much flexibility as you possibly can, right? Could you offer a course that has a greater array of flexibility embedded in it and still protect those course objectives and pedagogical goals that you're working on, right? Can you be flexible in content presentation? That might include a number of different formats. That can you be flexible in terms of student engagement? Perhaps one student is very comfortable in presentations, perhaps another student would prefer video. And again, a lot of this is going to depend on the nature of your classes. I know that I've had students with a lot of sort of presentation anxiety. And so I've offered them a couple of different formats. They can do a straight up PowerPoint slide. They could do a pacha, which is something of an abbreviated, more visual or creative set of PowerPoints. And in either case, they can pre-record the presentation if they choose to do it. They might still be asked to have questions, but their engagement in terms of the actual presentation can be a little different, right? And of course, I make that available to all students, regardless of their accommodations, right? I feel that still keeps the integrity of the presentation. And finally, assessment. One of the things that came up in our workshop was thinking about assessment. And if assessment um, is really something that you're invested in, and it really might be something you're invested in, does it mean that a multiple attempts at the same assessment is possible, right? It may not be, but if your goal is to ensure that students have learned the material, then having a chance to retake an exam and ensure that they have, in fact, learned the material might be warranted, right? Those are, again, just possibilities, right? Um, okay. And other ways you can do it is, again, adjusting the subject or format, giving them a choice of subjects to choose from, uh, and also the weight of the assignments. Perhaps you have two major assignments that you care about. Perhaps they can privilege, if they prefer a written kind of assignment, perhaps they can privilege that over the presentation and vice versa, right? Again, not that particular issue is not necessarily available to all classes, but it's an example of how you might think about being more flexible even as you sort of work to move forward with the goals, right? Now, the next thing is how do we talk to students about that, right? And it can be really difficult. Students, and I'll get to this later, are increasingly interested in accommodations. And so I think hopefully everybody's already including this in your syllabi, but Pitt expects us to have a disability services statement. And this one's pretty legalistic. It's very bare bones. Certainly maybe the absolute minimum you want to include in your syllabus. And in thinking with the Writing Center, who I also met with, Jessie Mail, somebody else mentioned Jessie. She's terrific, and she's a disability services consultant. They have a ton of resources for thinking about addendum to these kinds of statements in your syllabi. Yeah, Caro, I see that. She's awesome. And so she gave me links, which I've got further down in the presentation for your reference. She gave me some links, but I chose one that I really liked in thinking about the kinds of sort of feelings that many of you talked about in wanting to respond to students, that you want a basis of empathy and compassion, right? You want to presume the best of the students, that they have, genuine challenges in front of them. And of course, a lot of this became most evident following COVID, right? So the Writing Center's begun to address this and has some terrific supplemental inclusive syllabi statement. This is one that I chose. It's just another sentence, right? But your or two sentences, I guess. Your success in this class is important to me. And I think it's really important, regardless of what accommodations you feel you can make, leading with that notion that, hey, we're both invested in your success. And offering a sort of open moment to talk about that and thinking about, empathy and compassion. If there are circumstances that may affect your performance in this class, please let me know as soon as possible so that we can work together to develop strategies for adapting assignments to meet both your needs and the requirements of the course. And I thought it's a very compassionate way of letting students know that you're attuned to the challenges they might be having, even as you are committed to the sort of coherence and integrity of the course that you're offering. And that means being fair to all students, not just making accommodations. All right. So this is coming from Lee Cully, who is the director of DRS, and she shared with me several slides from her own presentation, which was, again, very generous. They're looking forward to getting some reflections on this. And again, I'll talk about the data of how and why that might be. But the university is committed to an inclusive and accessible campus environment. It's the mission of DRS to fulfill this commitment by partnering with individuals with disabilities and, the university community to provide equal access to employment classes, programs, and activities, right? And so, Caro, and others, while we're certainly focused in this workshop primarily on the classroom and students, I think DRS is well aware of challenges that faculty might face as well, and they have a whole separate set of resources available there. And so their key principles, building on universal design and other things that we've sort of talked about, are minimizing barriers to equal access, fostering inclusion and belonging, and cultivating disability awareness and education. All right, and here's the trends that we've all been feeling, and that's why I wanted to be sure and include the data from Lee here, because all the things that you all mentioned and are all feeling is really backed up by the numbers as well, right? And DRS is wrestling, as are we, with these sort of rapidly increasing numbers, right? 124% increase in students since academic year 17. And they're reflecting this, intensely growing demand. And of course, you see in 2020, the first real spike, and it's no surprise that it sort of moves on from there. I won't read all of these to you, but again, I think you see data to support the feelings that you're having in the classroom with larger and larger numbers of students seeking accommodations, adjustments, informal responses in your teaching, even if they don't have accommodations and the like. And of course, that has deep implications for DRS. Their caseload ratio is 1 to 537 at the moment. So nobody is feeling this more acutely than DRS. Yes, I'll share that link, Caro, later. I think it's in my resources, and if not, I'll get that for you. All right. And again, their focus is on minimizing barriers to equal access. So, that's where flexibility comes in. If for example, and it depends on, again, your course, the classroom setting and so forth. But if you find that time is an issue for 5 students in class, then time might be an issue for a lot more students. So thinking carefully about how much time students have and adjusting that time and being as flexible as that time for various tasks can be really useful. Other students may appreciate it as well. Obviously, we each have time limits in our classrooms, but some degree of flexibility, breaking up assignments across 2 days instead of one day, that could be some way that you bring flexibility into those issues. Um, Now, the impact on academic and campus services is also felt very strongly with 141% increase in academic accommodation requests. Again, that's what we're all seeing. I used to have maybe just a couple in a semester, and now I have many more than that. 60% increase in unique classes with students requiring accommodations. Um, it affects housing and dining. It demands greater faculty involvement. And of course, all of this is felt on the testing center, who I'll go into later, housing and the campus-wide initiatives to accommodate students. All right. Sorry, I feel like I've got so much information here. Does anybody have any questions? I don't want to overlook anybody or comments you'd like to make. Okay, so let me move forward. Okay. Um, and the testing center, and I'm going to give some details on the way they're responding to this, has, I think, felt the impact most acutely, with a 209% increase since academic year 14. And a 35% increase over the last 3 years. So that's really, really profound. Of course, the testing center wasn't busy at all in 2020, and we all know why that is. But it's really been a great impact. And one of the challenges that I had personally in thinking about the testing center for a makeup exam for a student with accommodations, not a makeup exam, trying to avoid a makeup exam for a student with accommodations, is that the testing centers essentially open 8:30 to 5. I had an evening class. So the testing center has some significant limitations, even as they're also seeing their own demands increasing. All right. Okay, so the testing center, I thought I'd start there. I'm guessing many of you have used the testing center, and that is often a big part of the accommodations. In theory, it provides a terrific proctored but sort of quiet space with fewer distractions, that sort of thing. Um, and they are pretty firm in asking that makeup exams. I didn't include the whole statement here, but in an attempt to make this, a really sort of meaningful space, they don't want folks who have missed due to athletic events. They ask that we stick to students who have a genuine family emergency or are ill for some reason and scheduling makeups. And for those of folks who are requesting accommodations, we don't need to work with the testing center at all. DRS will set up the testing center guidelines, and I'll talk about that again later on. And you can just upload the exam if there's an exam involved, and DRS will largely take care of the rest unless, of course, it's after 5 p.m., right? So that's one of those things I'm sort of wrestling with. Okay. Right. And so this is the statement, where they're going to work with DRS to make sure that it's not just students walking in for makeup exams. Okay, and DRS has done, well, I don't know. I'm guessing most of you may have seen it already. There's a new flex plan that has come out this year, and that is in lieu of the older ways in which they would have sort of sent you accommodations for the student and had you respond to that. In this case, they have what they call a flex plan that's designed to ensure that accommodations are provided in a consistent and compliant manner. Of course, they're thinking about the ADA and other legislation. They ensure for students that the accommodations will be applied fairly across courses, and the kinds of flexibility they can reasonably expect, which is something I think a lot of people had mentioned in the introductions they were looking for. For instructors, it helps to clarify what accommodations mean for a course, and allows instructors to establish clear guidelines, and some degree of flexibility. Okay, and for DRS, it has its own set of benefits. Okay. The updates they've made, the previous process, which we're all familiar with, I'm sure, asked us to engage in a discussion. Students initiated an instructor agreement, and if the consideration was requested beyond the baseline, they could pursue that as well, right? But I think part of people's frustrations earlier was that it was unclear what a baseline would look like, right? The current process allows for the instructor to initiate the flex plan and establish a level of flexibility while considering what are those essential course requirements, thinking about the kinds of things that I talked about earlier. Okay. You do the flex plan at the start of the new semester, thinking about flexibility and the sort of fundamental requirements of the class. And as I went through my own flex plan, I took just to sort of make it a little more familiar, I took some screenshots so you can see how you get started. And there's a guide to setting up accommodations that offers some guidelines and tips, that sort of thing. The main thing I think a lot of folks will be interested in, if for those of us who give exams or have to, in some cases, have to give exams, there's new guidelines for testing, and you can specify the ways in which you want it managed, the time in which you're going to offer choices to students, that sort of thing. Oh, I just realized we're late on time, so I'm going to bypass this. And just note that, as you can see here, you've got some guidelines embedded into the flex plan itself, with the two 24-hour extensions suggested as a guideline. One additional absence beyond what is outlined. And these are suggestions DRS is making. All right. And so finally, here's the resources that I promised. I include the actual link rather than a hyperlink because, sometimes those get broken. This way you can see some of the resources that are available to you. The one that I didn't have a chance to talk about yet, we've been pretty busy, is Hillman Library. For those of you who are struggling with, you know, excessive stimulus in the classroom or students who need quiet places to work. One of the things that Hillman does is loan out technology, like noise canceling headphones. The students can borrow them for up to 8 hours, and it can help create a sort of more temperate and comfortable environment in some cases. And that's it. Sorry, I just realized that it was a smidge past 1. And I'll open it up. I'll stop sharing because that's really distracting. And just ask if there's any questions, other things. I mean, we've talked about a lot of issues. I wish I could go into more detail. Thank you, Leanne. And of course, I'll make all of this available to everybody. But it was super helpful to me to have you share your concerns up front. Yeah, Caro?
Yeah, I have a question about the flex plan. I love the focus on universalizing accessibility and negotiating the sort of intersection of learning goals, values, and boundaries as an instructor. But the language of the flex plan I'm noticing is always like in excessive class policies. And as you notice, there's no kind of expectation necessarily for what the baseline is. Now, I know that this is going to be very sort of individual from instructor to instructor, but in the interest of sort of encouraging people to think about universalizing access, I'm wondering if it might be helpful in the FlexPan, at the risk of like asking us to fill out more fields,
Right.
including maybe some prompts about how the instructor might at least like reflect on the possibility of sort of like universal access and within their sort of like parameters of their course. Because I know that the Flex Plan already kind of has room for more narrative answers. There's that sort of box you can check where
Right.
you can talk about that.
Right.
So I'm wondering, is there the possibility to incorporate maybe some language that would share a resource for universalizing access and like just ask the faculty member to kind of think about that?
Yeah, I mean, I, of course, cannot wave my magic wand and make that happen. However, I mean, one of the things I'm excited to bring back to Lee, and thanks for her sharing the data and slides, is your reflections. And so I think that seems to me a very reasonable thing. That's one of the reasons why I like the Writing Center reflections so much, because yeah, it's important to carry that legalistic language from DRS, but that's really not how we talk to our students, right? And so the same could be said of the flex plan. Yeah, I'm happy to convey that. Thanks. Yeah, Laura?
So when I was talking about making clear to my students the language, right, I actually am talking about, look, I have to accommodate this. I can't identify which student needs the accommodation, but I need you to be in the classroom and to be aware that your actions, if you're gaming or doing whatever, have repercussions for everyone in the classroom. And so we're trying to create a comprehensive learning environment for everyone. But I think, I don't know that this is a standard way of addressing this issue. And I wonder if it works with kind of the FlexPan and discussion around technology in the classroom and use of technology.
Well, one of the things that I make the same statement, Laura. I have the same conversation, that I mean, I'm really just saying bluntly here for our purposes, like nobody wants to see your Amazon shopping cart, right? And that you can't avoid your Amazon shopping cart, right? It's a distraction. So one of the things, like in thinking about the trigger warnings that Gila was talking about, one of the accommodations I always offer or try and arrange is seating, right? So it's like, if you in a very sort of nondescript sort of way, like you don't want to inadvertently out a student and make them uncomfortable. But I just encourage them to take seats in the front row, seats by the door. If you think that, with regard to trigger warnings, we actually in GSWS really kind of make a statement about how we're not going to give trigger warnings, right? Because we don't know what's going to trigger you. We've got so many things that we're discussing that might be complicated and difficult to manage. So grab a seat by the door. Make it clear in a statement to students that, hey, I get it. If you need to leave class for a few minutes, that's great. Go for it. And try and arrange the classroom a little bit so that maybe you don't want to say like, okay, everybody on Grinder needs to sit in the back. Like that's probably a mistake, but you know what I mean, right? Like here's a nice comfortable spot. Why don't you try that? As much as
I actually say that. I actually say basically, if you just can't help yourself, limit it for everyone else. I don't talk about Grinder, but
yeah. Right. No, I don't really say that. I mean, I wouldn't say that, but that's maybe a trigger warning right there. But you know what I'm saying. Like the architecture of the room can be a place where you can be pretty flexible, right? All right. I'm so sorry for keeping you all. I was great. When I signed on to do the introductions as a group, I was only seeing like 7 or 8 people, and then people started popping in. So it took a little longer than I expected, but yeah, that's a great idea, Caro, like making it a class agreement with an open discussion about what they want. Student buy-in is always great. And you can say this is a flexible space, both in terms of the way I run the class, but also in the actual physical space and how would you like the space to be, right? I mean, some of those rooms are not very flexible actually, but God help you if you have a nationality rooms class, but you know what I mean, right? There's right. It's architectural and design, right? Okay. All right, great. Well, lefty issues. Oh my gosh, tell me about it. I could make a whole workshop just on what it means to be left-handed, right? Yeah, 100%. 100. I feel that. All right.
Thanks, Frayda. This was super interesting and a lot of work to compile an ever-changing,
This is so
set of
helpful.
policies and interpretations. Yeah.
Well,
So
thanks. I really appreciate your attendance here, So yeah, I feel like again, we could have had a gazillion other topics to talk about. But it's a start anyway. Thanks.
So Freda, will you share your slides? Because I really wanted to see I'm so nervous about the flex plan piece, and I really wanted to see how you included it.
Yeah, it was pretty painless, but for that reason, I included it because, as soon as I saw it must be initiated by the instructor, I was like, oh, no, please say it isn't so, right? But it wasn't that big of a departure, but I did notice they actually made recommendations, which I do think is important for some of the reasons Xiaolun raised earlier, there are unfortunately inevitably humans who will want to take advantage of this, and that can be frustrating in a different set of ways. So it does make visible to students what we consider perhaps to be a baseline, right? And that, yes, you may make additional accommodations, and that's fine, but it does give students a sense of what the baseline might look like. Yeah. So again, yeah, I'm happy to make the slides available, and the links there I think are really useful. And the workshops are great. The one on web accessibility, to be honest, was entirely overwhelming. There is a huge learning curve on the technologies, I think, I mean, for those kinds of things. And yet, I would be thrilled to have a visually impaired student in my class, and they're going to need those resources, they and others, right? So I'm not sure what to do about that, but anyway. So thanks for hanging in all. I really appreciate it on a Friday.
thank
Thank you
you.
so much, Freda.
All right, have a good
Thank
good
you.
weekend. Bye.
See ya.
Bye.
Bye.